Hi, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com and welcome to the sew along for the jacket. So this is an unlined jacket and it's specifically designed for these squishy types of fabric. So the one I have here is called poodle fur. As you can tell, it's a knit stretch fabric. You could also use this pattern for a Sherpa, any of those soft squishy, I think there's a fabric called squish as well, so any of those thick soft dense fabrics. The stretch you have now, you can see this is really floppy, so let's just talk about the stretch. So you're going to need good horizontal stretch. Now this is 100% stretch, but anything over 40 will be fine for this, 35 to 40 will be fine for this pattern. You don't necessarily need any vertical stretch, so as long as there's stretch across the body, that's fine. Actually, you could probably get away with a little bit less stretch on this because it is very much a boxy jacket. There's no darts, it's a really easy sew as far as unlined jackets go. The other thing you need with this pattern is fuse, so fusible interfacing. Now, fusible interfacing with a soft dense fabric. Make sure you test some on spare fabric before you start. When you fuse stretch things like a velvet, you've got to be really careful because of the pile, the nap, the depth of texture. So definitely take some spare fuse and some spare fabric and just test fuse your interfacing on before you start. And you need the fuse, you can't get away without it. Make sure the fuse you have is knit fuse. The retail assistants at your haberdashery shop, your retail shop, will be able to help you with the appropriate one for your fabric. So saying that, this is actually a really fast sew, so let's just get straight in. I was going to say let's get straight into it, but the other thing you'll probably need to do is you'll need to probably cut this pattern upside down. What do I mean by that? It's really hard to put the markings for things like the pocket drill holes on the right side of the fabric. So with this, what I did is I flipped my pattern upside down and cut it in reverse. You can do that, but you know, with sewing, whatever works for you is good. So I'm going to start with the front patch pockets, so we'll get straight into it. And I'm going to use 4 threads of matching colour on my serger overlocker to construct this. If you don't have a serger overlocker, you can of course use a zigzag stitch on your plain sewing machine. And a twin needle to finish the hems. So let's get into it. I probably just should have told you a little bit more about the fuse. So fuse spare fabric just to make sure that you don't lose any of the nap, the denseness of your fabric. If you do, if it starts to squish down with your iron, you can put something like a textured towel on top of your ironing board, and then when you fuse it upside down, you still keep the texture in those loops. So that's a good idea to help with your fusing. Alright, so let's go and do those pockets. So here are my patch pockets, and I have 2 of them, and they're rectangles. And at one end, on either side, you'll see notches. And they are 3 centimetres from the top. So all our hems for this pattern are 3 centimetres. So the first thing we need to do is overlock tidy the edge closest to those notches. And I'm using 4 threads of colour in my serger. And don't forget to do the other piece as well. So now we're going to use our iron. So go to your iron and turn it on. We're going to need steam, and just test some spare fabric before you press your good fabric. But when you're ready, what we're going to do is turn this to the wrong side at that notch position and memory press a hem into place. If you're finding your fabric is squashing, is that you're losing the nap too much when you use an iron, just skip this step, and you don't need to iron as you go. you just get a bouncier look. It's not essential with this that we do iron it, but sometimes it's just a little bit easier. Alright, so I've pressed this hem at the top of the pocket, this is the hand edge, into place. So now we're going to stitch this down. So run the first line of stitching directly through the overlocking line. Make sure you have a ball needle here, and make sure your stitch length is longer than normal. My normal is 2.5. I'm going to up mine to just over 3. The bonus of this pattern is that we want the stitching line to be seen. Also, if you need to unpick, it might be slightly easier, but just see how you go. So I'm going to run my first line of stitching through the overlocking line. You could use a twin needle for this if you want to. And now I'm going to run a second line of stitching parallel to the first, and I'm going to sew it 5mm, which is around about 1/4 inch away from the first line on the side that's been folded over, so this side. Okay, so now we'll repeat this on the other pocket. Now if you don't like the look of the 2 lines, that's fine, just sew one. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go to our iron and press those seams under by 1 centimetre. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. We can continue without pressing that in place. You'll just need to keep a really good idea of those seam allowances. 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Here I've pressed under. As you can tell, I haven't done a really heavy press, but it's just enough to help me out when we place the pocket in the right place. So don't get too worried if you can't see this exactly. Because it's so dense, any stitching issues will just be hidden and you won't even see them. So let's find one of our side fronts. Now I mentioned that I cut my pattern out from the back, and this is where I've put my markings as well, because it's too hard to do it from the front with all that texture going on. So what I've done is I've just popped a pin here to show you where my pocket positionings are, but I'm going to just transfer these through to the front now with pin heads. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I'm literally just going to switch that position around. Okay, so this pattern piece I'm working here is the right front as if I'm wearing it, and those pin heads that you can see in white are the markings for the pocket placement. So here is my front here, my centre front. Take one of your pockets and place it right side on right side, so wrong side of the pocket to right side of your garment. So what we want to do is, the pinhead placement is marked at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. So what that means is we make sure we've got the finished position of the pocket like this with its 1 centimetre, and we imagine a place 1 centimetre in and 1 centimetre down, so 3/8 of an inch. And we pop a pin in it like that. And then that pin needs to go exactly on top of the pin mark that we've placed, and that's our first position there. And then we do the same for each of the corners. We fold these in by one in, one down, 3/8, 3/8. Then we imagine a position 1 in, 1 down, 3/8, 3/8. Pop a pin in, and that pin goes directly on top of the pin head there. And we just do that for each of the 4 corners. Now because this is a knit, often our markings can move, and that's okay. So it's more important that we get this pocket drill holes covered and that the pocket sits nice and flat. Then it's absolutely perfect. So once you've got those placements in, what we're looking for is, we want this line here to be parallel with the side of the pocket here. So we want this center front line to be parallel to this line here. And then we're just going to arrange this pocket and pop some more pins in so it sits flat before we sew it on, just to help us out in our sewing process. So just take your time and arrange that. Now we're going to sew this pocket into place. So here is the top and here is the bottom, and we're leaving this edge here free for our hand, but we want to sew around the 3 edges, and we're going to start at this side. Now I normally sew pockets as an edge stitch, but because this sort of fabric is quite dense, you'll probably want to stitch it in around about 5 mil, 1/4 of an inch from the edge. I'm just going to sew mine at foot width, which is the width of my presser foot. So take your time and remember to back tack at the beginning and end. Now when you get to the corner, stop with the foot down in your work, lift your presser foot, turn your fabric and pivot around, and then just rearrange your work. Put your presser foot down and continue sewing to the other corner. If it starts to get a bit wavy, just stop and lift your presser foot, and that will release some of the tension. So I've stopped the same distance as the width I'm stitching from the corner with my needle down. Lift your presser foot, turn and pivot. And don't forget to back tack and finish. Okay, so now go ahead and repeat that on the other side. I won't show you a video of that, just go ahead and do that. To sew the welt pocket, make sure you've applied your fuse to the welt piece first, then fold it in half lengthwise and sew a 1 centimetre hem on each end. And then turn that through so that wrong sides are together. So I've managed to lose all my original footage of doing this welt pocket, so let's just do this again on a sample. So here is your welt pocket piece, and so make 2 of them. Now because this fabric is dense, we need something lighter for the pockets. You're probably going to struggle if you use the outside fabric for the pockets, so it's a good idea to choose something like a t-shirting weight, cotton lycra or 100% cotton, some sort of just lightweight knit, around about a 30% stretch to make the pockets with. You could of course make them in a contrast. I'm making mine in a very similar colour. And you're going to need 2 pairs, so 4 mirrors, 2 this way, 2 that way. Okay, so let's just assume this spare piece of fabric here is my side front that I want to put the welt on, and I've put the markings on the back of my fabric. So the drill holes are 17 centimetres apart, and it's a good idea to just sketch in or chalk in a line between these marks. And when you're ready, transfer the marks to the right side. So all I'm doing is popping a pin head here in, and I will turn this over and just transfer that to the other side. So we're using a process that's not too dissimilar from doing patch pockets. but we'll do a welt. So some people call welt slant pockets. It is a welt pocket. A welt pocket has one side to it, and a jet pocket has two sides to it. Okay, so when you're ready, just double check that these are in the right place and we'll get started. These drill marks are marked at 1 centimetre, so what that means is place the raw edge of this piece against those drill holes, and they should sit 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch in from the edge. And now I'm going to sew a seam at 1 centimetre. So what's going to happen is that pocket's going to be turned over like this, and the hand will be inserted through here. So take a pocket piece and place it right side down, and you'll see notches. Now the pocket bag piece has 1.5 centimetre seam allowances. So match that into place. And for this one, all we're going to do is stitch exactly on top of the stitching, if you can, that we've just done. One centimetre. Take the other pocket piece and place it right side down, and match the notches to the bottom of the pocket, and we want the raw edges of all of these together. And on this side we're going to do exactly the same thing, stitch a seam at 1 centimetre. And stop opposite the notches. Now if you turn this over, you will see that our seams are parallel to each other. What we're going to do now is do some cutting. Come to the top edge, and we want to cut in this shape. It's a V, and then we want to cut through the middle. And at this end, we want to cut an inverted V and slice through the middle. Hopefully you can see a little more clear in this shot. So when we trim out towards the stitching, don't trim all the way to the stitching, leave a millimetre or two, so 1/8 of an inch, just a small gap there. And also just double check that these are parallel to each other, both this way and at right angles this way. When you cut this, just cut through the single layer. We only want to cut through the main fabric itself. So now come back to the side and just push everything through. Okay, so when you've pushed that through, you can plain stitch and then overlock. So you've got 1.5 centimetres, 9/16 of an inch, just to give you some extra room. But I am going to sew this around the edge and then use my overlocker to tidy it up. And there's notches to help you match this. Okay, so it could be a bit awkward, but just do your best with that, and then go ahead and overlock tidy that edge. And then we need to finish off the top of this, so just arrange this pocket so it's sitting nice and flat. and you want the bulk of the pocket to be on that side. And what we're going to do then is edge stitch the top and the bottom of the welt, like this. Now edge stitch with this thicker fabric could mean 1/4 of an inch, just whatever you feel is the correct one for your fabric. Now you should have a little tail like this hanging out. What you can do is stitch that down when you're sewing the pocket, if you prefer, or you can stitch it afterwards. So you should have this little, ignore that little thread there, let's trim that off. If you've done it correctly, it should be sitting like this. And stitch it down. There is the opening for your hand, and go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Now it's time to sew the shoulders, so place the back right side up and the front right side down and match the shoulders, so you'll see the armhole curves are together. And we're going to sew the shoulder seam here from side to side. Now I think I might have mentioned before that the seam allowances were 6mm. They're not. I've changed them now to 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch, just to allow for a little bit of extra shaving that is going to be required by our blade. So you can cut a small amount off as you sew. Okay, so once you've sewn in this shoulder seam, go ahead and sew in this other shoulder seam. Now we're sewing in the sleeves, so this is my front, because here is the pocket and here is the lower part of the armhole. So I'm taking a sleeve piece and I'm going to place it to the armhole. So when we sew in the sleeve, it's cut on the fold because it's a drop shoulder. All we have to worry about is that the notch at the center of the top of the sleeve matches the seam of the shoulder that we've just sewn in. So right sides together, overlock serge those into place. Okay, and go ahead and repeat that on the other side. When you have both of those sleeves serged into place, what we're going to do is sew the underarms and side seam. So fold that right sides together like so. Now, to save time now, I'm going to overlock serge finish the hem here. So I'm just going to do that first, but you could leave that till later if you wanted to. So all I'm doing is just tidying that raw edge up. If you're cover seaming it, of course you don't need to do that. So fold that right sides together. So now we're going to sew from the wrist all the way up through the underarm. We want to make sure those underarm points match. Good idea if those seams face in different directions. And as you go down the side seam, there will be notches to match. And then just sew all the way to the hemline. And do that on both sides. Now we're going to do the sleeve hem. You can cover stitch this into place if you want. You could twin needle it. Now I am going to just use a plain stitch because this is quite a wide jacket type sleeve. The seam's not going to be under any stress. Still, it is a knit fabric. You're better off using a stretch stitch if you can. I'm, as I said, going to plain stitch it. The seam allowance here is 3 centimeters. I can't remember what that is off the top of my head in imperial, but what I'm going to do is just stitch at that width. I'll pop the dimensions underneath through my overlocking line, and I'm starting at the seam, and I'm just using my stitch guides to help me with that width. Now there is a notch to help you with that seam width. And don't forget to do that on the other side as well. Before we go ahead and do the facing, what I'd like you to do is overlock tidy the lower entire hem. Now, if you've liked using your iron and you're happy, go ahead and memory press a hem at 3 centimeters all along that bottom edge. If you don't like the way the iron's reacted with your fabric, you can skip this step. I'm going to show you a bit of a cheats way of doing this collar. What we're going to do is take our collar pieces and place them right sides together. So here is our collar like so. The long curved edge here is the outer, the shorter curved edge is our neckline. So place them right sides together, and we're going to sew with our plain stitch 3 sides. This seam here along the outer edge and back to the same position on the other side. Now when you're sewing a fused piece to an unfused piece, especially when it's knit, you'll probably find it easier to sew it like this so that the fused piece is on top. Now this might move a bit, but that's fine. You've got a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch to play with. What we're going to do is start here and start sewing. When you get to this corner, stop with the needle down, lift your presser foot, turn and pivot, and then just rearrange your work and sew across. If you find that it's slipping or moving, just stop, release the pressure and rearrange. We want to make sure this notch in the centre matches. Now we're going to snip the corners just to reduce some of the bulk. When you trim it, don't trim it right to the edge. Leave a few millimeters gap. And then turn this collar through. Now generally when you're sewing with fuse, the fuse side is the right side, which means it's the side that's going to be seen when the garment is being worn. So now you'll know which is the right side and which is going to be the underside. Now we're going to do some top stitching, so make sure that the fuse side is on top. So a key feature of this jacket is top stitching, and you can top stitch at whatever width you want. Now I've experimented between 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and 1.5 centimetres, which I can't remember the conversion, I'll pop that down below. I personally feel 1.5 centimetres is the right amount. It's completely up to you. What is a good idea? Test this out on spare fabric before you begin. But whatever you decide now, just make sure you're consistent with that. You could go as far as 2 centimetres, which is 3/4 of an inch. Just make a decision and just stick with it. Sometimes the chunkier the better. But as a rule of thumb, this is a smaller poodle fur, it's softer, so I might go smaller. If you had a really thick and heavy Sherpa, the 2 centimetre, 3/4 of an inch might be better. Right, so what I'm going to do is now, making sure that these edges are all fully pushed out to the edge, we're going to top stitch at whatever width you choose. Make sure your stitch length is nice and long, and just follow parallel to the edge of your fabric. When you get to the same distance from the edge, stop with the presser foot down, lift, turn and pivot, and then rearrange this so that that edge of the collar is pushed right out on the edge, and stitch that same top stitching width. Then just stop and rearrange. Stop the same distance in from that edge, lift, turn and pivot, and stitch. Okay, so you can see how we've got this really nice sort of bobbly top stitching effect going on. Now we're going to tack stitch the collar into the neckline. So place your garment right side up, so this is the left side as if I'm wearing it, and locate the centre back neck. So right in the centre back neck on the garment there'll be a notch, so mark that, and then place your collar right side up as well, so the side you sewed, so the fused side is on top, and find that notch in the centre, match it to the notch on the other side and match that to the centre point. Now we're going to work our way out to either side. Part way along the collar you'll see a notch, and that notch there will match to our shoulder seam. And then you'll see this sort of triangular shape on the collar. So let's just show you where that marks to. This has a 1 centimetre seam allowance, so you've got to imagine a point that intersects 1 centimetre. So you've got to imagine the stitch line like that, and then pop a pin like that in. So there is where that, if you drew an imaginary line there and a line there, that point is there. And then you've got to imagine a line, exactly the same thing on our collar piece, 1 in and 1 out, so 3/8 of an inch there. So that point there sits on top of that point there, like so. And when we sew this, then that will twist around and come up to here, where there should be, there it is there, another notch to show us the position of the starting point there. And then it's exactly the same in the reverse on the other side. So I find the easiest way is to tack stitch from here down, starting 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch in, and then we'll worry about these extra pieces at the end, mainly because of the stretch. So try and stitch exactly, it's a tack stitch, but try and stitch exactly with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm not back tacking. So in order to be able to sew this dog leg in really nicely, what you need to do is just snip the corner of the fabric up to the stitching line. Now that means don't stitch through your stitching, but what I'm going to do is just start sewing over the top of my previous stitching line to the stop point. I'm going to stop with a needle down in my work, and now that little slash I cut will just enable me to twist this around like so and get a lovely corner, and then find the notch down here, match that like so, and stitch down to it. So once you've done that side, now we sort of have to do it in reverse for the other side. So come to the left front and find the notch, which is your starting point, and place this against it. And tack stitch that at 1 centimetre. Right, so come, it's going to look a bit awkward, come to the place that you stopped and snip in. And then continue stitching. 2 more stitches there, and then stop and turn. Okay, so here's the little trick with that collar. Now you can use that tack stitching as your main stitching if you want. Just, you could even go ahead of it, go over it again, sorry, with the same stitch to secure it into place. But because this part here is going to be visible, what we're going to do is we're going to overlock this together. So overlock this using a 1 centimetre seam. So what that means is you need to overlock up and use that tack stitch as your outside guide. Or you could just use that tack stitch as your main stitch, whatever you prefer. But basically we do need to tie this edge up, and we need to make sure the seam here is 1 centimetre, and you can use that stitch line as a guide. We don't have to do the entire seam, we're just doing this curved part, not that dog leg part. And normally with a collar we'd have a back neck facing in there, but this would end up too bulky because we're using Sherpa. Right, so that's what we're looking for here. Now we're working on the front facings, and you should have a pair of them, which is 2 mirrors. One's been cut out like this and one's been cut out like that. And we want to overlock tidy just this short edge at the top on both pieces. And now we're going to overlock tidy this internal curved line here of the facing. And do that for both pieces. I'm going to start by working on the right side as you wear it. So to come to the upper piece where you attach the collar, and then take your facing and place it right side down, so we have right sides together. So you can choose to sew this with a plain stitch or a stretch stitch or serger. So just like we did that dog leg before, I'm going to pre-cut a small dog leg at this corner. So you've got to imagine a line 1 centimetre in, 1 centimetre along. So we're looking at our stitch line, which is 3/8 of an inch. 3/8, 3/8. You could draw that in with a pencil and mark it with a pin if you prefer. So what I'm going to do is, that would be the line there, and I'm going to snip on the diagonal up to it. But I'm leaving a few millimetres. So I'm doing that because I want to be able to stitch this as if it was a straight line. Okay. So come to the shoulder seam intersection and match that overlocking to it like so. And I'll just put a pin in there to hold that into place. So that dog leg I cut is going to go here, and I'll just pop another pin in it. Because this is Sherpa, it's very forgiving. And then we have a notch here. Now that notch should match to the end of your collar that we've tack stitched in there. I'll pin that down there actually. And then that should match across like so to the front. And of course we'll continue to stitch down the front to the hemline. There's a notch that we need to match part way down the front, and that notch actually is to show us our button position there. And if we come all the way down to the hemline, you'll see a notch at 3 centimetres, and that notch will match to the 1 centimetre notch here on the facing like so. So that is correct. You need 2 centimetres, 3/4 of an inch gap at the bottom. So let's sew that into place. Now you might have a slight gap there where you sewed from, where you might have serged 6 mil to 1 centimetre, just make it fit. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Oops. as you sew the facing down the centre front, match the notches here. So what you'll do is you will have a 2 centimetre, 3/4 of an inch gap here. So what I'd like you to do is stitch down and stop with the needle down directly opposite that notch. So you are 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. Lift with your needle down, turn, so lift the presser foot, turn, pivot, and arrange this facing here. So we're now going to sew a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam here, and we want to make sure that this 2 centimetre, 3/4 of an inch is maintained. So we want to sew parallel to this raw edge. Stop at the edge of your overlocking and back tack. And now go and repeat that on the other side. So when you're ready, turn that to the inside. It's a good idea to not clip this, so just turn that over, that seam there, turn that up, and you'll create a fold, and then just turn that through, and you'll get a nice sharp corner like that. So make sure that your facing is turned so it is right side out, wrong sides together, and then come up the centre front and just transfer the location of the notch to the outside of the facing. This isn't essential, but what I find is when you're stitching a facing, it's best if you stitch it right side up as you're going to see it, because you can control it a little bit easier. So what we're going to do is stitch a top stitching on this facing. So this is the left side as if I'm wearing it. So here's my facing. Now you can choose, you can start all the way up here at the shoulder, you could start stitching here at the intersect, or you could start stitching where most general tailored garments would start at the stitching here when the collar and lapel meet. Completely up to you. For this I'm going to start at the shoulder line, mainly because it's a bulky garment, bulky fabric, sorry, and this will just help this facing sit down. Entirely up to you. So just remember the width you stitched before, and we're going to stitch parallel to that seam line. So I'm stitching at 1.5 centimetres. 1.5 centimetres, which I think is, I'll check the conversion below. I'm not going to tell you wrong. 1.5 centimetres. So I'm stopping with my needle down in my work. I'm lifting my presser foot, turning and pivoting, and I'm just going to flatten this all off. Make sure this seam here at the lapel edge is pushed all the way to the outside, and just follow this line. And when you get the same distance away from that corner, just stop with the needle down, lift your presser foot, turn and pivot, and rearrange the facing. So when we sew down the centre front of the facing, this is the reason we have the pin in place. We only want to sew as far as the pin, and then we'll back tack. So make sure that's pushed out on the edge and stitch. Okay, so for this point downwards, what I'm going to do is stitch it on the other side, because when this is being worn, oops, sorry, I'll just turn that, oh gosh, so you can see it. So when this is being worn, that will sit out like that, and at that point there, that's where you'll see the lower part. So it's a good idea to stitch that lower part from the right side as well. And for this, I'm going to stitch from the hem up. Now this is the left side, and generally with all seams I would stitch top down, have the seam runs top down, but for this one I am doing it bottom up. Now we have a hem coming in here at 3 centimetres, 1 3/16 of an inch I think, whereas this seam here is 1.5 centimetres, which is 9/16 of an inch, I'll check that. So we're going to have an intersect point here, so Just remember that I'm starting right at the very end, right at the end. Make sure that seam's pushed out and stitch up. Like so. And then repeat that on the other side. And this is the effect that lapel will give you. Now it's time to do the hem. You could certainly hand stitch this by doing a blind hem at this lower edge if you wanted to. So the hem allowance is 3 centimeters, which is 1 9/16 of an inch, I believe. I'll just double check that and put that measurement down below. So what we're going to do is, because I don't like hand stitching anything, is I'm going to use my plain stitch on my sewing machine. You really should use a stretch stitch like a zigzag or a twin needle on this. However, the seam shouldn't be under any stress, so you might get away with it. So the position of this is here. You can see when we sewed it in parallel that created our hem turn there. So all I'm going to do is use my stitch width guides here, and I'm going to stitch through my overlocking line at 3 centimeters. So I'm going to start and just catch the edge of that facing in, just to make sure it's held in the correct place. I'll do a small back tack and then stitch around to the same position on the other side. Next step is our button and buttonhole. If you are using an iron, give that a press before you move on. Okay, so button and buttonhole in this garment. So the buttonhole goes on the right side as if you wear it, and we want to stitch the buttonhole directly on that notch position. So there's only one allowed for in this garment. You might want to look at my video on my YouTube channel, which is how to stitch buttonholes in knit fabric, especially something like this. It's dense. What you might find is that the Sherpa goes, or whichever fabric you have, is going to get caught in the bobbin area. I've detailed a couple of techniques to deal with this. The fastest one for this is probably just to sandwich this between 2 layers of light tissue paper. So that's like the sort of tissue paper garments get wrapped in, or if you have it, tear away stabilizer. Just be warned that whatever you use, you need to be able to pick out. So if you're using a paper, you might need tweezers to pull that out afterwards. So go ahead and stitch your buttonhole on this side. The details are in the written construction sequence, and pop the button in on the left side as you wear it, because with women's clothing we have right over left, so the buttonhole always goes on the right hand side as you wear it. So there we have it, our garment is finished. Thanks for joining me. As always, thanks for buying my patterns. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing your creations on my Facebook page. If you'd like to, please leave a comment below. Always open to suggestions. See you soon.